If I can have members of council to please come to their seats. Members of council, if you can please come to your seats. Members of council, if you can please come to your seats. Members, please come up to the council chambers. Okay, members of council, we do have quorum. This meeting is now resumed. Members, before the recess, council was debating executive committee item 23.5. Before we return to that item, I would take the release of member holds. Councillor Mihevc.
Yes, sorry, page 4, EX 28.23, private ramps on public right-of-way.
You're releasing? Mm-hmm. Okay, on page 4, EX 28.23, private ramps on public right-of-way. Councillor Mihevc is releasing. All in favor? Carried. Councillor Perks?
Speaker, on page 5, AU 10.10, Auditor General's observations on the quantity of product realized from the city's single-stream recyclable material blue bin program.
Okay, you're releasing?
I sure am.
Okay, thank you. On page 5, AU 10.10, Councillor Perks is releasing. All in favor? Carried. Councillor Davis?
On page 7, Planning and Growth Management Committee, PG 23.4. I'd like to release it, but I want a recorded vote so I can vote in the negative.
Okay, on page 7, PG 23.4.
This is area-specific amendment to the city's sign bylaw at 150 Sherway Drive.
Okay, thank you. Recorded vote.
Actually, I have another one, Speaker.
Yes, we do.
Councillor Perruzza. Councillor McMahon, thank you.
Councillor Perruzza, I would have never started the meeting if we didn't have quorum.
She's on it, man.
Councillor Perruzza, your vote, please. Councillor Perruzza, your vote, please.
Councillor Finley and Councillor Palacio, when you're seated, please.
Councillor Perruzza, can we have your vote, please?
The item is adopted 22 to 5.
Councillor Perks.
Thank you, Speaker. As part of my never-ending quest to reduce the work burden on the sign unit and to reduce the billable hours for the sign lobby, I'm going to be releasing PG 23.5 so that I can vote in the negative as well.
Okay, on page 7, PG 23.5, signed bylaw for 153 Dufferin, recorded vote.
Counselor Robinson, please.
Counselor Davis.
The item is adopted 20-9.
Okay, are we sure we don't have any more? Okay, let's put the, I'm sorry, Councillor Mallow, you have one?
I was waiting for Councillor Grimes to arrive because I know that he wants to move a motion on this. And if anyone can help me remember where the item for the striking committee for the exhibition place, I found it, page 8, ST 14.8. I want to vote against it because I can't in good conscience support one of the members who are being recommended.
Okay, thank you.
But I also understand that Councillor Grimes.
Okay, Councillor Grimes, do you have something?
Thank you to Councillor Matlow too, but I've talked to staff and I've talked to Councillor Layton. I'm good. I have no motion to move. I'm good.
Okay, so recorded vote then? Okay, this is on page 8, ST 14.8, appointments to the CNE.
Counselor Holliday, please.
Counselor Perruzza, please. Counselor DeGiorgio. Counselor Wong Tam, thank you. Counselor Karagianis.
The item is adopted 26-5.
Okay, so if we can put the list up then for item. For EX 28.5. Councillor Doucette, you have questions.
I do, Madam Speaker. Thank you very much. Question regarding the crossing guards. I just want to get clarification on this. We've put out an RFI, and we now have a company or two who may be interested in taking over this program. My concern is, when we put this out to a company, does that mean that all the crossing guards we have right now will no longer be employed, or their employment will be moved to this new company?
Through you, Madam Speaker, that RFI generated 4 firms of interest. What we put in that RFI was evincing an interest in whether any of these companies would be willing to take on the existing crossing guards as staff, and there was lots of interest in that. So we think that we can work through issues of transfers for people who are interested in doing so.
One of the issues we have right now, and I understand completely, is if one of the crossing guards can't show up for one of their 3 shifts a day, we have a police officer stand in, and I understand that that's a concern. Will this company then be the group who will place another trained person in the place if a crossing guard can't be there on that day?
Through you, yes, the company would then be responsible for providing standby for backfill.
Will these crossing guards, new crossing guards company, be provided training on the fact that they are supposed to help everyone across that crossing, not just the little kids, anyone who's coming through?
Through you, yes.
Okay. will we be able to use this company in locations where crossing guards are warranted, but we don't actually have anyone in those positions right now?
Through you, the warranting process is still something that's in discussion between police and transportation services, so we'll continue to keep council informed about how those decisions get made.
Okay, but there is a possibility that if we have a warranted area, but we don't have someone of the community filling that position, we could use this company to put a crossing guard there?
Through you, yes, that would be possible. There'd be extra funding required for that.
Right.
Sure.
Okay, thank you very much. That's all my questions.
Sarah. Councillor Shan.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Just following up on the line of questions around the crossing guards. So currently the training for crossing guards are provided by the Toronto Police Services, I'm assuming. Because I've seen them come and do sometimes on-site training.
Through you, yes, that's mine.
And that will continue to happen in the new model if this was adopted?
Through you, yeah, the city would arrange for fulsome training for the crossing guards, whether we use the exact same module that the police are using right now. We would work with the company who was selected to ensure the training was appropriate and consistent with the needs of the City of Toronto.
Right now, the police services pay for the crossing guards. Am I right? And we would be now giving funds to a vendor to be paying the crossing guard. Would these new vendors, if they were chosen, if we go this route, would they need to comply with the fair wages policy as part of our?
Through you, yes, we would write that into the RFP.
Okay. And in terms of the cost impact, you had mentioned that the cost is likely to go up. Has that been have they given as part of wage increase as well as the management increase, or is it broken down?
Through you, Madam Speaker, it's a combination of both the management of the contracted services as well as the wage increase.
Okay. And in terms of the outdoor or beach lifeguards and so on, yeah, the question is around transition. So right now, as I understand, they work closely with the police services as outdoor, or they are hired through police services and paid
through you, Madam Speaker, that's correct.
If this was to change and we have two different employers in some way.
Through the Speaker, there would be different activities and different job responsibilities for two different groups. So we would be responsible in Parks, Forestry and Recreation for the actual guarding of the beaches, where the police would still be responsible for the marine unit out in the water.
So in a situation like this where you have two different, technically two different bosses for that role, would there be some sort of an MOU developed in terms of how to collaborate or protocol that would be developed as part of how they would?
Through the Speaker, there would be some, whether an MOU or some kind of letter of understanding between the two that would delineate who is responsible for what. There's also a number of opportunities to work together on a number of things.
Yeah, not just in terms of delineating role, but also in terms of how to collaborate. When do they need to collaborate together? Because
that's correct.
Sometimes two different accountability frameworks kind of confuses people as to
that's correct.
When to collaborate and when not to.
We've already had some preliminary conversations with Toronto Police about that.
And they're open to having that?
Absolutely, yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Carroll.
Thanks, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Madam Speaker. So, all of these are things that have been in earlier reports in terms of letting council know about the way forward. But I think now that we're actually moving, you have everyone's attention. So, with respect to the REOI, I hear a lot of people are surprised now that we're contracting out. But I've heard you say that in terms of requests for interest, the rules are a little more flexible there. So in terms of REOIs, you've had people come back, and the conversation has been about there already is a trained force of crossing guards. Would you be interested in using them? So that's all right. Special training is needed when you move from lifeguarding a parks and rec pool to the beach. You're not as far down the track, am I right in reading the report? So in any early conversation that you'll be having there, if you started with a contract solution or your own employees, would be around we already have a trained force and whatever operation would consider using them? Is that the model you're working on now?
Through the speaker, if I'm understanding correct, the model that we're working on now would be that the lifeguards that had traditionally performed the service and been supervised by Toronto Police, PFNR would now hire those lifeguards, would provide some additional training to ensure that they receive the appropriate level of training, the different type of training required for a waterfront lifeguarding service, and would be reporting in and hired through Parks, Forestry and Recreation in the city. They would be city employees.
Okay. And has there been any opportunity in terms of the crossing guards? We're not all madly in love with the model as it exists today. Many times in this council chamber, we've had a councillor be upset because they want a crossing guard, they think they need a crossing guard, and the police don't agree, and they don't get the crossing guard. Could we explore the authorization model? Would we prepare metrics here for council and for city staff to work to put crossing guards where there is the need? Would that be a municipal decision instead of a Police Service Act decision?
Through you, Madam Chair. Yes, once the program is transferred to the city, it'd be the city's responsibility, and it's our intent to look at the police criteria as well as the other best practices across the province to develop a criteria that's suitable for the City of Toronto.
Okay. And are there, as part of starting with the request for interest proposal, have you looked at other models where crossing guards are delivered as a service by someone other than the local police service?
Yes, as part of our review, we did a jurisdictional scan of approximately 15 municipalities across Ontario, and there is a mix of the service being delivered with contracted services and in-house services.
So part of the problem, I think, is that there's a bit of a disconnect, because all of that was also looked at the police service end through the Way Forward Task Force and reported out to the board and citizens who go there. And we looked at all of these different models before even recommending that we do that. But council doesn't see that, and a lot of the citizens don't. Within the timelines that are here, is there time to bring some of that knowledge, some of the scan that you have done, some of the reviews we've done, and some of the reforms that we're looking at here, including the initial services that have taken place in other police services, moving things back to municipalities? Is there time within the process for these first two transactions to bring some of that knowledge forward so that council understands the iterative process that brought us here?
Through
Yes,
you,
we
Madam
could do
Chair.
that.
Okay, all right, perfect.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that. Two people rose and sat down, and I didn't get the answer in there. It was sort of a pop-up. Yes.
Yes, we could do that.
And there is time. We don't need to change these dates in order for that to happen?
No, because there are other recommendations which we will also be reporting back on, so
Right.
we could combine it with that.
Okay, and last question, Madam Speaker. There are many, many other recommendations here. And while it doesn't say in all of the other services coming forward in the later recommendations, we talk about things moving over here, the police are already reducing their budget. We've gone from 5,500 officers, we're now at 4,750. So we've been flatlining and absorbing and reducing. We're not going to see a recommendation that transfers funds over, because that's not how we do our general accounting. Our general ledger just takes revenue in and services
Councillor
out.
Carroll, that
But
was your last question.
Yes, but so I'll just finish the question then. Is it understood that the services that are taken on here, the staff to deliver them, additional staff, will be part of the equation? Other services will not suffer.
Councillor Matlow. Oh.
So we're not transferring any of our staff over to the city to run these programs, but certainly the city will have the need to hire people to actually manage the contract, especially the school crossing guard, which is kind of a new program. The other program, the lifeguard program, can probably be integrated into the current Parks and Rec portfolio with some additional management costs, I would think.
Okay, Councillor
Yes,
Carroll,
all
your
of it.
time is way out. Okay. Yes. Councillor Matlow, question. And try to make your question short so you get an answer.
Madam,
Yeah.
my time's ticking away.
Yes. Sorry, Councillor Matlow. Go
Thanks.
ahead.
Madam Speaker, through you to staff, why, and correct me if I'm wrong, but is my understanding that we're not expecting that dollar for dollar, or whatever reasonable equivalent it would be, given that it might be less expensive now to provide the services through the city. Why wouldn't we be removing or expecting those whatever funds we budget through the police currently to follow the service? So in other words, I hope we're not just considering allowing the police budget to stay static or whatever they're recommending this year, without saying, dollar for dollar, if it's $7 million that we use, for example, for the crossing guards to the police, that we'd be removing $7 million from the police and then putting it towards transportation staff or whoever will be taking responsibility for the service.
So this is in response to a broader effort, obviously, led by the Police Transformational Task Force to allow the police to focus in on their core business. We as staff have been quite supportive of that, understanding that we do want police resources to be focused directly on police business. The accounting of this is actually a little bit difficult, but it's likely underpriced in the police model. If the police were retaining this, they'd likely have to, as part of their transformation, revisit that. It would likely end up costing a little bit more. On balance, we're taking the existing resources from the police, shifting it over to the city. When we actually do the RFIs, it looks like it costs a little bit more, but the costs are probably very, very similar in terms of the bottom line.
I need clarity about the point that you just made about on balance. So are we actually shifting specifically dollar for dollar the money that we provide the police to provide a service and then saying, here you go to whoever needs to provide the service now?
So through you, Madam Speaker, in terms of the lifeguard and the crossing guard budgets, we are transferring all the direct costs. We have arrangements with some additional costs that the budget will come over, and we're actually employing the police services to continue the warrant program in the short term, for example, water testing that's getting done through Toronto Water. And then on the crossing guards, we are also have about half of their indirect costs transferred over to the city.
Okay,
thank you.
Hold on. We have staff that are trying to answer questions, and we have councillors that are asking the staff the questions. Now, please, Councillor Davis, please, allow the staff to hear the questions so they can answer. Thank you. Just take your seat, please. Okay, Councillor Matlow, go ahead. Sorry.
No, thank you very much.
Yes.
Through you to whether it be the city manager or the general manager of transportation. Typically, when a member of council is holding a meeting with community about a transportation-related matter, as we do about other matters, is it not commonplace that a member of your staff will attend those meetings to provide information, to answer questions, often on evenings or during the day, what have you? Is that not a common occurrence?
Through you, yes, that is a common occurrence.
In fact, is it fair to say that it's, because I've never experienced this, that it's almost, have you ever heard of a situation where they've said no to a member of council? A member of your staff, if they're needed to support a community meeting about a matter of import to the community?
Through you, no. Our staff are available
to
support the council and the constituents.
To whomever would be the reasonable person to answer this, is it not reasonable to suggest in the same spirit, with the same mission, that if a member of council needs a representative of the police service, whether it be uniformed or civilian, but somebody there to be able to provide information, answer questions, that they should make themselves available to support the community?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Holiday, questions.
Thank you, Speaker. I think to the General Manager of Transportation, can you describe to me what the criteria is to, if I want to have a crossing guard today somewhere in Ward 3, what do I do? For forgive me, I may have directed it the wrong way.
Okay,
Mr. Speaker, sorry, I didn't hear the question.
Okay, that's because everybody's talking to you at the same time. Okay.
Speaker, can you let me
Yes,
start
we'll
again?
start. Okay, can you start over, Councillor Holiday?
If I'd like a crossing guard in Ward 3, what do I do today? Who do I ask?
So you'd go to our traffic services who have a criteria, they would assess the situation and then basically make a recommendation on whether it warrants it or not.
As painful as this is to ask, do your traffic services people follow the warrants every time? And they provide an officer based on what the rules are?
I'm not sure I follow the question.
Do you ever provide a crossing guard if it doesn't meet the warrants?
I'm not aware of that.
Does council ever overstep you and command that you send a crossing guard?
I'm not aware of that either.
Thank you. Over to the General Manager of Transportation. One of the contemplations in the report and the committee recommendations is to develop our own in-house warrants. Do we have warrants for other things in this city? Traffic lights, stop signs, speed humps, left turn, sorry, not left turns, but you know what I mean, there are warrants?
Through you, yes, we do.
Does council have a habit of ignoring those warrants and doing whatever we please?
Through you, my understanding is that that has occurred, that the council has taken, not recommended staff's recommendations on warrants.
So we can't trust, okay. Given the amount of dollars that are transferring over, and we just heard that the crossing guards are provided as warranted, is it a reasonable assertion that this will be a growth industry in this city if we bring the crossing guard program over and develop warrants where we will apply and insert these individuals into the community?
Speed humps. Through you, my understanding is there is a latent demand for crossing guards throughout the city.
Can you describe what a latent demand is?
But there's more demand that there currently is than there is crossing guards out there right now.
Is that because there are more locations that meet the warrants, or there are people that have expectations that go beyond the warrants?
So, well, and again, I'm going to lean on my friends in police services if I miss a tick on this. But my understanding is that in addition to the warrants being met, there's also a resourcing issue as well as the warrants being met.
Fair enough. So resourcing issue aside, even if we met all of the warrants, would it be a reasonable assertion that we would probably be ending up putting crossing guards in places that do not meet the warrants because of council's decision-making process?
As Miles indicated, council would have the authority over the approvals of crossing guards going forward. Although through 2018, we would continue to rely on police services to make those determinations.
In your estimation as General Manager of Transportation Services, based on the data that you have on incidences across the city, do we have a public safety issue with a lack of crossing guards at this point in time?
Through you, we certainly have a need to increase public safety, especially as we know through Vision Zero around schools and with seniors being our two focus areas this year. Crossing guards are certainly one tool. They're not the only one.
And do you suspect that they'll, based on some of the recommendations of the committee, that there will be a change in the warrants and where you will recommend that crossing guards go, based on what the warrants are today to where you might envision them, even if this is only an empirical statement at this point in time?
Through you, for the next 2 years at a minimum, I would assume we would continue to maintain the warrants as proposed by Toronto Police Services. They have a fair amount of experience in deploying them, and they work relatively well. On the go forward, I couldn't answer.
Could you ever envision a model where the Toronto Police Services will continue to be the gatekeeper of the warrants, where the program may be funded and the resources may be managed by the city, but we'll look to a third party to do the evaluations?
Through you, Madam Speaker, we've had some discussions about how that could work, and I think through this transition period over the next 2 years, we can get a little bit more specific about how that might work.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor DiCiano.
Missing in action.
Councillor DiCiano.
Missing in action.
Councillor Pasternak.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. My questions follow closely with Councillor Holliday's motion. When the program transfers over to the city, if approved today, will we also get the data? In other words, the list of requests across the city, the personnel who requested them, whether it came from a councillor's office or an individual, will we get the data that drove the warrant results and the staff reports? Or will there be an iron curtain going down saying, well, that's confidential information, you're not getting that data? Toronto has to start from scratch.
Through you, Madam Speaker, I think we would get that information. I think we would have to maintain privacy where it's appropriate to do so, but our intent is to have it be a transparent process.
Now, when we do receive, so we're getting your assurances that all that data will be moved over, so people who've, groups that have been, or schools that have been on the list for years and years, they won't lose their ranking. In other words, their request from 5, 6 years ago and the warrants that they generated will still rank when they arrive here.
Through you, these are some of the details that I think we still have to figure out with Toronto Police Services. Our intention is, if the warrants have been met previously and there aren't either aren't crossing guards in place now, or there's some changes to circumstances, we would consider that. I don't see any reason why we would start from zero.
Well, would you agree that if we don't get that data, we would have to spend thousands of hours, both at the local level and the staff level, to rewrite all those warrants and remeasure all those crosswalks?
Through you, Madam Speaker, we would really need to grandfather existing locations. We would have to start with what we have. Otherwise, yes, there would be a significant ramp up.
And would there be tenure for existing employees, people who are doing the job now?
Through you, I don't know that I would call it tenure, but certainly our interest is in having the existing crossing guards move over to a new model, and that's why we asked that question quite specifically through the RFI of the interested contractors as to whether that would be something they'd be interested and willing to do, and so we would look to have that be the model.
Now, one time it was talked about, because of a shortage of crossing guards, on-duty officers would actually help children or adults cross the street. Was that ever implemented, and to what scale?
Through you, I think Toronto Police Services may be able to talk about the scale. Certainly today, the crossing guards, if they need a backup, there is a backup plan, but then if that backup doesn't work out, then it is a police officer who comes to that location to provide the crossing services. And so we would need that capacity moving forward, but not delivered by Toronto Police Services. We would look to the contractor to provide that service moving forward.
I see. So, so if a police officer stepped in, who would pay?
Through you, the new model would not require a police officer to step in. I think that's part of the transformational task force. Some of the recommendations is that the police would not be involved in the crossing guard program on the go forward, so that the contractor would have to provide all of that backup support.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Perruzza, questions?
Yes. Why did this program evolve under the police, under police auspices to begin with?
We don't really know. No, it's something that was just historic. It was provided. It's obviously a program that requires duty of care. We happen to be providing that program, and sort of been providing it now for a number of years. So when we looked at our core services, we just felt that this should no longer be provided by police. It's so we could focus on true public safety services. So it's just historic.
Correct, historic. But I guess the way I'm sort of visualizing it is so the police responsible for public safety, broader public safety. I would imagine that the staff sergeant, when he's deploying and briefing or debriefing his officers, that the crossing guard component of community safety would very much be a part of what the police are doing as well. So it's important from my perspective, for the principal agent for safety, which is the police, and the crossing guard, which is sort of an addendum to that safety initiative. I guess that's the reason that would have been that would have risen under police auspices. Am I wrong?
I think that's correct. I just want to stress that while it's not a core service for us, we will continue to partner with our colleagues in transportation to make sure that those issues, as you described, if there are systemic issues, that we'll certainly work together with them to try to resolve those issues.
I guess that leads into sort of the next component of my question, which would suggest that one of the things that we here at the city have been trying to do, where we have these disconnected silos that essentially don't communicate well with each other, whether it be, for example, on Bell Telephone coming along and ripping up the curb, then the gas company coming along ripping up the curb, then the city transportation coming along ripping up the curb. Some people I know on Council Crescent, for example, in my own ward, for the last 5 or 6 years,
Councillor
I've had
Peruzza,
the
please
curb.
ask a question on what we're, on the item, please.
I apologize for the preamble to my question, but I wanted my question delivered with some level of clarity, and that's why I was using the preamble. So the preamble, basically, so you have all these silos that kind of like don't communicate with each other, and they all come along and perpetually rip up roads for years and years and years because of that breakdown in communication. So you're saying you're going to work well with transportation, but how do you work well with that contractor to make sure that unit of safety that's currently being delivered in a neighborhood or in a school area or wherever, continues to be somewhat seamless, that it's safety and the principles for safety, i.e. the police and everyone else, is working in tandem.
Part of the way forward is actually partnership with our colleagues and stakeholders. I think in response to your question, though, transportation will manage the contractor or contractors. We will work with transportation in terms of issues that might come up that require our attention as well. So it is very much a partnership, even though it's not a core service for us.
Because you do see the crossing guard as an extension of a community safety program that is essentially a police service.
It's public safety, or it's certainly traffic safety, but it's not a core service for us.
Okay.
Okay?
Sure.
Okay. Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To Toronto Police Services, how many crossing guards are employed by the Toronto Police Service?
About just over 650.
650. How much are they paid on an hourly basis?
Between about $13 and $13.75 an hour.
And of the $7,525,000 that was paid out for the service, how much of that was paid to regular police officers?
None of it right now.
None of it.
The 7.5 is 6.8 in actual direct costs in terms of what we pay to the actual crossing guard, and about half of the administrative overhead of about $1 million. We actually, so if you look at police officers that actually had to fill in a crossing guards, that's probably about 3,400 hours times $50 an hour.
3,400 hours?
Of reported time.
Okay. And sorry, and what was the cost then? I mean, I could do the calculation.
$50 an hour, so about $150,000.
Okay. And so it's for that reason, those 3,400 hours, that the recommendation came forward to transfer this to the City of Toronto.
That is one of the considerations, but it was not the primary reason.
So is it practice that whenever a crossing guard is unable to perform their duty, that a police officer goes to that location?
As was explained by the General Manager of Transportation, if the backup isn't able to come on short notice, then a police officer would in fact be stationed at that crossing guard location.
And that would typically be a 1 hour?
Could be a morning, it could be an afternoon, it could be well, we basically guard 3 days, three times during the day. So it could be one time or it could be 3 times.
Got it. Okay, that's my questions. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
You, Councillor DiCiano.
Madam Speaker, I'm not sure why my name showed up on that list, but I had no questions at
You
this time.
don't want to speak? Okay.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Matlow to speak.
I have 3 motions, Madam Speaker. One is that Council direct the City Chief Financial Officer to ensure that 100% of the necessary funds to deliver the beach lifeguard program and school crossing guard program are transferred from the Toronto Police Service to the appropriate city divisions. The point of this motion is to make it very clear that it shouldn't just be that we sort of allow for, even in some cases, half of the existing funds that are allocated to those specific services to remain within the police budget when the responsibility and the duty to provide those services are going elsewhere. And then we'd actually have to find another way to then increase our ability to provide financial investment into those services. So I don't think that's right, and I think we need to make sure that the dollar follows the service and the service provider. Another motion is that City Council requests the TPS and Chief of Police to request the Chief of Police to provide TPS representation at community meetings initiated by members of Council that discuss matters regarding the enforcement of traffic regulations. I personally have had experiences, several recently, where within 53 Division, I'm dealing with a community that is concerned about the enforcement of the act, of regulations, speeding, going through stop signs, etc. And I will get a no from the Toronto Police Service saying they don't have the ability to send anybody to the meeting. I'm not editorializing about why they can't. They will often, in fairness to them, say they don't want to pull somebody off the street doing their job to then go to a meeting, but the status quo isn't functioning. So we need to resolve that and deal with that directly. City staff routinely will come to meetings to support, and by the way, it's not fair for transportation staff who are routinely at those meetings to then be in a position to have to speak for the police about enforcement matters when it may not be a matter of reconfiguration of the road or the signs or things that they're responsible for. So I ask you for your support to engage them in this important conversation, to support members of council and their communities. And then lastly, that City Council requests the TPS board to request the Chief of Police to provide necessary resources to adequately enforce the Highway Traffic Act in Toronto's neighbourhoods. I want to give another example of 53 Division. Those of you who are within that area, and perhaps if you are in another division, you will be able to empathize. Or maybe you've got the same situation. Between Lawrence, Bloor Street, Thorncliffe Park, and Spadina, we have 2 officers enforcing traffic regulations. And there is no visible police presence in the community when it comes to those who just ignore speed limits every single day or just breeze through stop signs. And when parents and other residents and seniors and caregivers and others contact our offices, we have to explain to them that we'll look at what we can do, but obviously if there isn't even a possibility that somebody breaking these rules will ever get caught, then the behavior continues. And I think all of us agree that whether it be through technology, through personnel in some cases, but there needs to be more of a presence in the neighborhoods, and that hasn't been addressed adequately yet. And my vision, and I know our community's visions of whatever transformation means that there be adequate attention to traffic regulation enforcement. We all hear about it, and we all know that this is the #1 priority to our communities, safety in our neighborhoods. I hear about it every day, and I speak both as a councillor, but also as a father of a 4-year-old who wants to make sure that we make our communities safer. Speaking of a 4-year-old, I want to just share something just on a lighter note. I discussed this with Molly this morning. And I asked her for her advice, and I said, how do we make our streets safer when we're crossing? And she advised, this is my daughter, she's 4 years old, turning 5 in January, that we build bridges over our streets and that we put water slides on either end, which will incent kids to use them. So I may use this as sort of, something that I'm going to be like, really running with. I may not, but I certainly wanted to suggest that even the kids are coming up with ideas for us because they know that this incredibly urgent matter needs addressing. Thank you very much. Yes.
Councillor Carroll, you have a question, a clarification?
I think so. Can I see the motion?
There's a few motions.
There's 3 motions.
Yes, that's the one. That's the one. So, Councillor, you want the necessary resources, but I'm wondering if this is up to and including the work that is now going on to developed this new role of the traffic warden. We're now looking for new roles, and the recent Police Services Act reform actually starts us down that path. In terms of getting the resources for some of the traffic challenges you discussed, you were talking about some of those things the mayor was actually attributing to the new traffic wardens. So the resources is in any form?
Well, that's why I didn't prescribe, the details of whether I want that individual to have the ability to enforce the Highway Traffic Act, and right now having two individuals, whether they be wardens, whether they be constables, is I think inarguably insufficient and inadequate to be able to cover a region from Lawrence Avenue to Bloor Street, from Thorncliffe over to Spadina. And we just have repeated concerns from community members that there isn't any visibility of police on the streets, and they'd like to see more adequate enforcement. But whatever form that takes, Councillor Carroll, I'm fine with it as long as they can enforce the act.
You're not speaking against proceeding with the way forward, though, because part of the problem that what you describe, I think you're aware of this, or maybe you're not. Are you aware that part of what you're describing is because the reductions are happening? Because council set the direction that our budget flatline and reduce, we've absorbed about $55 million, maybe 70 by the end of this, by going from 5,561 officers to 4,750.
Well, I would actually...
the new model needs to hurry up and come forward.
I would actually submit to you, Councillor, that the political debate about whether the police budget is too much or too little, or this or that, or issues between the union and the management, all that stuff, I'm not actually delving into that. That's an aside. What I'm saying is, if I'm looking for the kind of service that I believe our community expects and demands, we collectively are not providing that sufficient service. 2 enforcement officers for a region that large in the city is just demonstratively not doing the job. So we want to see, however we can argue about the budget, we can argue about how much we want to invest, and we will during the budget process. But we need to have more adequate resources put on our streets. They just don't exist today. And I hear that from residents everywhere.
Thank you. That was your last question. Councillor Pasternak, clarification of the motion.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Yeah, just for clarity's sake, and it's similar to what Councillor Carroll was asking, we've had many community safety meetings in Ward 10 where the #1 issue is traffic safety, road safety, pedestrian safety. There's growing lawlessness on our roads. Police Services said there is no way they can enforce the Highway Traffic Act with a sworn complement of 5,200 officers. We're going down to 4,700. How do you expect them to enforce the Highway Traffic Act with a complement that's about 500 less?
During the budget process, we need to have a debate and a discussion and hopefully a resolution with the Toronto Police Service about what that means. Now, there have been announcements. I was with the mayor and Councillor Burnside and others when the Premier announced photo radar is coming to our streets eventually at the mayor's request, within schools and near schools and neighborhoods. I've been a very big supporter of the movement towards having more traffic wardens in our city. But I also am convinced that we need to have, and I'm not suggesting, it would be absurd to suggest having a police officer at every corner, at every neighborhood in the street, and that's unreasonable to request. But even just the visibility of enforcement. The average driver right now, if you are speeding through a stop sign or just speeding through the streets, you basically can fairly assume that you're not going to get caught. There's no reasonable possibility you're going to get caught right now on an average basis. But if you think that there might be an officer somewhere nearby, that's why we need increased blitzes, that we need just the ability to kind of show that the police might be there. It might change your behavior because you might be a well-meaning person who cares about the community and the kids and the seniors and everybody else. But if you're a selfish idiot who does not care about anybody else, but you might care about your own pocketbook, you might get caught, you're worried about getting caught, maybe that will change your behavior, and we just don't see it in our neighborhoods. And that's what I'm reflecting and responding to with this motion.
Well, I'd be happy to write you a letter of introduction to the Chief of Police, because he'll tell you the same thing I said, that enforcing this legislation is almost impossible based on the complement we have. But thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pasternak.
Councillor Karygiannis, clarification.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To my colleague, I'm wondering, is your understanding or your meaning or your intention that we tell the Chief of Police how to run his department?
Well, again, to clarify, if you read the way that I wrote the motion, that City Council requests the Toronto Police Services Board to request the Chief of Police. As you can see, it was very deliberately written in a way that understands the governance structure that we are under, and I hope that responds to your question. We're not directing or telling them what to do. In fact, we lawfully can't.
But, I mean, we're saying to the Toronto Police Services Board, please tell the chief. So it's like two off.
What we're doing is that we are letting them know that this is a priority to us, and certainly, I mean, I could just say this in all candor. I know this is a priority to my community. This is something that I hear about like every day, every week, when I'm picking up my kid at school, when I'm visiting the other schools, when I'm walking through the neighborhoods. I believe, based on my conversations with many of you, that you would say the exact same thing that I just did. And I'm asking us collectively to let the police know, and the Police Services Board know, and the Chief of Police know, that this is a priority that we want attended to.
I agree with you, this is a priority, but I don't think, I mean, asking the Toronto Police Services Board to ask the chief that is going to make any difference. I think that probably the chief see this and start laughing his head off and say thank you very much.
Well, if anyone laughed their head off at a request, I think, of this import, about a matter of such import, that would be. I mean, I have no suspicion that he would do what you just.
Well, I don't even think this is clarification of the motion.
And if you don't ask for what you want in life, then you are assured not to get it.
So the chief certainly does not understand what we're looking for, but we need to ask him. Is this what I'm hearing?
I mean, this is kind of a simple human condition answer, but if you need to ask for what you believe is right, and if we don't make the request as council, with the force of council, the resolution of council behind us, then we're not setting it as a priority on their agenda in the way that I would hope we would. So I'm simply, honestly, I believe that I'm speaking for a number of councillors, a number of members of council who I think share the same priority, because we are listening to our community. I'm sure you hear the same thing.
Councillor, I'll tell you one thing. I totally agree with you that what you're asking for is in order.
Yeah.
But I think it's going to fall on deaf ears. But that's
Well, and I hope, you know what, maybe, and I hope you're wrong, and I want to give
thank
them the benefit of the doubt.
Councillor Matlow, thank you. Thank you. Councillor DeGiorgio, clarification of the motion.
Yeah, I just, the problem I have with the motion, as I interpret it, is that we are asking the board to ask the chief to make sure that he provides adequate resources to police the city in an effective manner. The reality is, from my understanding, is that when the police chief comes forward with his budget, the understanding is that he's requesting resources from the city council to be able to do his job of policing the city in an effective manner. So I have a fundamental problem with, given that we look at the police chief's budget to accomplish what you're seeking to accomplish, I'm thinking maybe that's the right time to address your issue, to add additional resources in the budget to make sure that, in fact, he does do the job according to your perception of what needs to be done.
Well,
I'm not saying that you're not right.
I appreciate that, Councillor. I would suggest to you that in fact both times are the right time to do it. I would actually, any opportunity that it's in order on our agenda as it is today, as you can see, to make it known to the Police Services Board what our priorities are. I think it's an important time to do it. And yeah, I will raise this again during the budget process.
And I'm not disagreeing with you. What I'm saying is the moment the police board says to the police chief, you've got to do a more effective job, they have to be prepared to provide him with the financial resources to do a more effective job. Because anyway, but I'll leave it at that for you.
I agree. And I think one of the challenges that this responds to is that many citizens, many residents out there, and I imagine you've experienced this too, will call, let's say, your office and say, Councillor DeGiorgio, I want you to send a cop out to my street and get them to enforce it. Well, you don't have the ability to do that. You don't, right?
I have the ability to do that. They may not come out because they may not have the resources.
What I mean
to
is
come
you
out.
can't call the police and say, this is what I'm sending the police to that street. Then they'll contact transportation services and say, why don't you go do that? Why don't you enforce speeding and all the regulations in our community that people are ignoring? And they don't understand always that that's not their job. What I'm asking today is that we go to the proper place and say, this is what we need you to prioritize. They can come back to us during the budget process and say, you know what, you've asked for this, and this is what's going to take, and then we debate it. Then we debate it, and we can determine whether or not we believe they need more money or that we press back and say do it within the existing resources that we've already allocated. What I'm saying is that I'm asking us to determine a priority and express it very clearly to the police.
Thank you. Councillor Campbell? Oh, you took your name off. Councillor Wong Tam to speak.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I am very concerned about this particular report and probably the subsequent reports to come. I want to say, first of all, I commend the Toronto Police for putting together their modernization plan. I think it's a very good plan with this 32 solid recommendations. Many of those recommendations are about reforming policing culture and trying to get to a model of neighborhood-centric policing, which I think we all recognize does work, and it's something that is widely wanted by our communities. The challenge that I have with this particular report is, number one, the Council has not necessarily discussed the modernization task force and the work that they've put out, and that's not to say it's not good work, because I've just said that it is. But we actually haven't fully unpacked what the impact is for the city, because what we are seeing in this report is the first step of probably subsequent steps that will look like either a side load or a download, or however you want to frame it, of policing services now to the city. And the first components that are before us is around lifeguards and are about crossing guards. But if we flip to the back of the page, page 16 of 16 pages, what we also know is that they've taken a look at what is seen as sort of non-emergency risk assessments, and they've grouped them together, and the divisions that will be affected will include more transportation services, the Economic Development and Culture Office, including Film and Television Digital Media Office, so they can anticipate the request to receive those policing services. They would be asked to deliver those policing services. There's also municipal licensing and standards, and 311, which we already know MLS is at an incredible crush already with the volume of work that they have. What I'm concerned with, and Madam Speaker, if you can just hold my time, it's very difficult to hear just because there's a little bit of chatter.
If I can ask members, please. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. So what my concern is that this is the beginning of a much bigger conversation, and I think that conversation has to be had. And we know that the police are struggling with the dwindling number of officers that they have. They need to do some internal work with respect to their scheduling. They need to do work with how they report out. And certainly we are going to come to the table and work with them. What I'm challenged with, Madam Speaker, is the fact that the staff have come to the table and started to talk to the Toronto Police Service, but I don't believe that there's been any parameters set out from this council on how to engage in those discussions. It doesn't mean that those discussions shouldn't take place, but I am concerned that we may be starting off not necessarily from a place of leading from the front, but perhaps leading from the back. And so I am really quite troubled because of that environment that we're in. We want to be able to work with Toronto Police Service and certainly work with the Toronto Police Board, who's trying to transform and modernize the force. But we also know that the bureaucracy is quite tasked with the service requirements that they're already being asked by us to deliver. Every year, We flatlined their budgets. We asked them to do more and more with less and less. And the city is growing, and it's much more complex. So at the bottom line, if I actually use an evaluator on how I want to move forward on this particular discussion with this report, is that I want to take a look at service levels. How quickly are we responding to the citizens of Toronto and the residents of Toronto when they call 311 for service requests? How quickly are we responding to MLS requests? How quickly are we dealing with traffic operations already before we start to take on more? I'm not saying that we shouldn't do more, but we have to resource our staff and the visions in order for us to do it, which will then take us to a conversation about operating dollars and revenues in the long run. And if we're looking for value for money, that's got to be part of the discussion and a lens that we actually evaluate this program. But I think that what we need to do is actually slow this down, to think it through carefully, and I don't believe that we need to rush into this. I'd be very happy to support a deferral motion, which I believe is coming, and I think that we probably need to recognize this is the very first step of multiple steps to come, which will effectively be a side load or a download from the Toronto Police.
Thank you. Your time is up. Thank you. Councillor Davis to speak.
Thank you, Speaker. I would like to move a motion to refer Executive Committee Recommendations 7, 8, 9 back to the City Manager and direct the City Manager to report to the Executive Committee in the second quarter of 2018 on the proposed alternative options for service delivery and any proposed request for proposal terms and conditions. And anything else they want to put into the report. Because what we have before us is a report that I believe does not give us adequate information to make an informed decision about whether or not a contracted service is going to provide us the kind of service levels we expect. We don't know what is the level of supervision required. We don't know what kind of accountability will be back to us or to councillors, what kind of oversight will be required by our transportation staff. We don't know how they intend to fill vacancies, and that was identified very clearly as a problem. We don't know what kinds of organizations brought forward an expression of interest to a process that we had nothing to do with and we have no idea about. The request for information, what were the agencies that said they'd be interested in running a contracted service? What are the profit margins? How do you make profit out of low-wage jobs like this? It's $1.5 million more to run a contracted service is the estimated additional cost for a contracted out model. I don't really understand why it is we'd be looking at an alternative model that is going to cost us more. And we have so little information. Are they going to be bound by the fair wage policy? What are the implications of the fair wage policy? I don't know if there were other options that were looked at. I don't understand the staffing and oversight that's being required. This simply says, take it back and bring us back something that gives us more information about the RFI that was undertaken. It also recommends developing new warrants. What are warrants? How are they going to affect the service levels? So these are important people in our communities who keep our streets safer for our kids. And I think before we make a final decision to send it out, we should see what's in the terms and conditions of the RFP. We need to understand a lot more before we make this final decision. I think it's very reasonable. Our communities, how much do our school communities, our school councils, how much do they know about what we're doing with this program? How will they be involved? Has anyone talked to the crossing guards? No, apparently not. Toronto Police Service told me not. So I'd like to know what they think. Sometimes ideas from employees can give you some insight. So I hope you'll consider supporting it. I too have concerns, as Councillor Wong Tam mentioned, about this side-loading that is essentially happening. We are simply side-loading, and oh, by the way, not only do we know whether the service will be any better, we know that the services will cost more. I mean, I'm not convinced as well that transferring the lifeguards, side-loading the lifeguards over into recreation is an appropriate step to take. It's a very specialized type of work, I know, because my son did it. It's an open water qualification. It's a very different thing. They work with the police on the boats. They deal with things like bodies, people dying. It's a very different kind of job. But I heard from staff that they're going to be able to accommodate those kinds of changes within the PF&R program, and we have direct access to how that will unfold. So I'm only suggesting at this point that we have just another look at the crossing guard program before we decide to move ahead with this model. Thank you.
Okay, we have question, Councillor Robinson.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I just want to ask the mover a couple questions. And was she aware at executive I moved a motion to develop an implementation plan for school crossing guard program to really include the warrants developed by or in consultation with the Toronto Police Services in accordance with the Highway Traffic Act. So I think that, you know, this is a process that will look at locations to be added, removed, and hopefully that really appeases your concerns, because I'm not sure deferring is very effective. We've got a solid report in front of us that we want to move ahead.
Well, we all have our opinion on that.
So I'm not sure what your objective is when we also, you know, really layered on some great motions on top of the report.
I've seen the motions that have come from committee. I'm suggesting that we simply don't have sufficient information about the proposed contract, what the terms and conditions will be, how much accountability we have, what service levels there will be, and there should be a report back to us.
Well, I don't think there's any value I don't see any value in delaying. Well, there's usually more than a few words in a sentence, so if you just let me complete my sentence, I'd appreciate it. I don't see any value in delaying this. It's a solid report. It's comprehensive. As well, executive debated it, and they supported my motion to also make sure we're working hand in hand in consultation with the Toronto Police Service in accordance with the Highway Traffic Act. So I'm not clear on why you would want to delay this any further. Let's move it forward. Why would you want to delay this?
I've given my reasons. Thank you.
Okay. So, Councillor Burnside, clarification of the motion.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Through you, did you inquire about the operational impact or the financial impact of this motion?
I'm sorry?
Okay, I'll repeat it. Did you inquire about the operational impact or the financial impact of this motion? That is delaying it by about, well, second quarter could be 8 months, up to 8 months, 9 months.
Well, my understanding is that the budget transfer is going to be, it's going to be transferred. We've got a net, there's no net loss of revenue at all. The question is whether or not we draw on the reserve for the purpose of doing additional work. So that is one impact.
My question was, did you inquire? That was actually my question.
I asked whether or not a study could be done, and I can read what the financial impacts are.
So were you aware that to be ready for the 2019 school year, staff would have to get an RFP out? And then, of course, that takes time. And if we only get the information back at the end of sometime in the second quarter, usually means the end of the quarter, that there wouldn't be enough time to get that RFP out ready for the 2019 school year. That's what my original question was actually referring to.
No, you were asking me about the cost implications.
No, operational. and
No,
cost.
you
I
said
asked if
today.
you had the operational impact
I'm
and the
happy to
cost
change the
implication.
date to first quarter.
Thanks, you answered my questions.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Doucette to speak.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I won't be long. I just want to rise in support of crossing guards. I believe they are a very important part of our community. In my previous life as a parent, I was on the school safety committee, and we were always going through the process of looking how to make it safer for our children to get to school.
Oh, just one sec, please, Councillor Doucette. Councillor Pasternak, do you have a point of order?
Yeah, point of order, Madam Speaker. A motion of referral has been moved. Isn't there a speakers list for referral?
No, it's not a referral.
It says the word refer right
I
in the
know,
motion.
that's what I thought too. It's just certain items that are being referred, not the item. I asked the same question, Councillor Pasternak. But was the whole thing, but it's not the whole thing.
Can I start from the beginning?
I put your time on hold.
Once upon a time, there was...
No, but I put your time on hold, Councillor Doucette. Okay, continue.
So, as I was saying, in my previous life, I was very involved in elementary schools and high schools. And one of the things we were always looking at is how to get our children to school safely, how to encourage our children to walk to school, because when a child walks to school and a parent feels safe allowing that child to walk to school on their own, you are reducing the number of cars who come and drive up to your school every day. So not only do we wake our children up in the mornings and allow them to get fresh air before getting to school, which we know their brains are working better, we also eliminate the pollution around our schools with all the cars hanging out and dropping their kids off. I understand we have to have criteria about where crossing guards go, because I know if we didn't have a criteria, most schools would be asking for 4 or 5 crossing guards. I know that's not always possible, but there are certain streets around our schools where crossing guards would allow our children to get there safely. So I also understand that really having a full-fledged police officer helping children cross 3 times a day is probably not the best use of their resources. I would rather they were on my side streets catching those people speeding in the school area. So I do support having different people helping during those times when our crossing guards can't get there. It's the same as having a police officer looking at a big hole in the middle of a road. Not really good use of resources. What I am concerned about is how this RFP is going to go. How we are going to make sure that we have these crossing guards in the right places, what the criteria is going to be. Are we able to fill spaces where the criteria has been agreed upon, but we don't have a warm-blooded body right now to fill that position? Whenever my police department comes to me and say we're looking for... Madam Speaker, I'm sorry. I can't even hear myself speak.
Councillors, Councillor Davis, Councillor DiCiano. Please. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, well, I've lost some of my train of thought. So anyway, what I'm basically saying is that I do support this. Often when my local police department come to me and say, you know, Councillor, we're looking for some crossing guards, can you please promote this? And we put out there how you can become a crossing guard. It is a wonderful job for many people in our community. It gets them involved with the children, it gets them involved with the families. So I do truly support that. What I'm hesitating with is similar to what Councillor Matlow has the issue of where are these funds coming from? We need to find the money to do this properly. You can't do this half you know what, because these are our children we're talking about. My office is often being requested for concerns in our community. You know, cars are speeding, going through stop signs, and I go to my division and ask them to enforce these. But our divisions only have X number of officers, and I know for a fact that my division has lost quite a few officers recently to retirement and people leaving the force, and we're not replacing those officers. I guess what I was going to put a motion forward, but I haven't because my staff spoke to staff earlier. I would actually like to have seen a motion coming forward that the province should do cost recovery for the city. I don't think there's actually much point in doing that, but I do believe the province should actually be helping us fund some of this because it is the state, they fund the schools. They should be helping us fund the safety of the children, getting them into their schools. And on that note, I will finish, but thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Councillor Troisi?
No.
Councillor Troisi?
Sorry.
Okay.
Take that off, Jane.
Can you please?
Speakers list.
No. Councillor Troisi, can you please? You have a motion to introduce the confirming bill.
Yep. Thank you, Madam Chair. That leave be granted to introduce a bill to confirm to the point of the introduction of this motion the proceedings of City Council meeting 34 on November 7th, 2017.
Shall leave. Shall leave be granted to introduce this bill? Recorded vote.
Councillor Kelly, please. Councillor Wong Tam, please. Councillor Shiner. Councillor Davis.
Motion to introduce the confirming bill carries unanimously, 34 in favor.
Shall this bill be passed and declared as a bylaw? Recorded vote.
Councillor Filion, Councillor DiCiano, please.
Councillor Lee, please. Councillor Lee, your vote, please.
The motion to enact the confirming bill carries unanimously, 34 in favor.
Okay, thank you, members. Thank you to staff. Recess till tomorrow, 9:30.